Good morning. I'm making this video. There's been quite a few comments going back more or less since I first made that video on the isolation transformer mod. There's some misconceptions, and some of you had commented that that is not an isolation transformer the way I have it hooked up. And I can't seem to get my point across. So I drew up a chart which was actually explained thoroughly when I did the job. So we're going to go over it again. What I did is screenshot some of the commenters, some of which go back 5 years. And of course, rather than answer comments in writing on typing, I am doing it now. I just got one a few days ago, so I figured let's get started. Let's touch base and finally put this thing to rest. Because, first of all, before we get into it, this was a hospital-grade isolation transformer, and when I got it, the neutral was bonded to the case of the isolation transformer. Okay? So your neutral was grounded. Also grounded to the case was the third wire from the line. So your neutral and your ground are bonded together on the case. However, I lifted and insulated the neutral. I removed the neutral from the case, so it is no longer bonded to the case. However, the ground wire, the 3-prong plug that goes into the wall, comes out with the green wire connected to an eyelet and bonded to the chassis of the isolation transformer. The output jacks, of which there are 4, but I'm only going to be showing 1 because they're all in parallel, its ground prong is still connected to the case. However, the neutral is floating along with the hot, I should say. However, this is designed for 2-prong plugs only. In other words, radios that only have 2 prongs and do not use the ground plug. If I have a piece of equipment that has the 3rd prong on it, it does not need to go through the isolation transformer. It can, but it's not going to be safe because the chassis is grounded. The ground wire goes all the way back to the electrical panel, as some of you had pointed out, and I'm aware of that. I do know house wiring. I've done some years ago. As well as the neutral. Your neutral and your ground at the electrical panel are grounded on a common bus. Okay? So, it will become unsafe if you were plugging in a radio that had, like a stereo with a 3-prong plug or a guitar amp with a 3-prong plug, into it, because the chassis is ground. So theoretically, you're still going to get a closed circuit because the neutral still goes back to the electrical panel. The neutral is not broken anywhere along the line. So yes, I agree with you there. However, we are not using this isolation transformer for 3-prong devices. We are only using it for two-prong devices, such as your AA5 radios, radios that are line connected, the hazardous type of radios. Now, I've got this big Crosley on the bench here, which I have to finish. That has a two-prong plug on it. However, it has a power transformer. Nonetheless, it is not going to hurt anything to connect that radio to the isolation transformer, and it will be safe, even though it has a power transformer, because we're not utilizing the third prong on the output of the isolation transformer. So with that, I got a chart here, and I'm not a very good drawer artist. I don't draw very good. It's hard to read. Some people are talented with that. I'm not. So we're going to take it to the bench. I'm going to set this up, and let's put this thing to rest, because I've been getting a lot of criticism on that in the years past, and I've been approving the comments, but I'm not answering them. I'm answering them here. This is 100% isolation transformer with a floating neutral. But nonetheless, the third prong is active and grounded. But it's not being used. And that's the big key. The ground prong is not being used. Let's get on the bench and get this thing finished once and for all. I might get in the way of the thing, but we're going to try to do the best I can. All right? Looking at this end here, this is your line input. For simplification, the hot is here. You have your three-prong cord, with your hot, which is the black wire, your neutral, which is the white wire, and your green, which is the ground. Okay, when I bought the isolation transformer, well, actually, I got it given to me. It had the nice three-prong heavy-duty cord on it. It had a circuit breaker in here, which I didn't draw. Okay, first of all, your ground wire, your green wire that comes off the line, is bonded to the case. It continues on, and it is bonded to the case. It's actually bonded to the case in one place, but I drew it over here too. Here's your third prong on the output. There are 4 outlets, and the grounds are all common, bonded to the case. Okay? So you follow me now. This is the green wire coming from the line where you plug it in. Whether you plug it into your Variac or whatever you do. I have it plugged into my Variac. Okay. And then I control the isolation transformer that way. Okay, so you got a continuous ground here, connected to the ground prong of all 4 outlets. There are 4 duplex outlets on the front of the isolation transformer, and they're all in parallel. Your hots are in parallel, your neutrals are in parallel, and your grounds are bonded to the case, which theoretically is in parallel. So yes, you do get a continuous ground on the case, on the green wire, the third prong, the round one, which is bonded directly to the ground, which goes to the circuit panel. Okay. On the neutral, your neutral comes in to the primary. When I got this, there was a common point where the ground, the green wire, and the white wire were grounded. In other words, this neutral was bonded like that, which made this thing a non-isolation transformer. So what I did is I lifted the neutral from the case and ground. So in other words, this is gone now, okay? So you have a floating neutral, you have a floating hot side, okay? So, if you're using this on a device that has a third prong ground pin, and it's connected to the chassis, this is no longer an isolation transformer for a 3-prong radio, stereo, guitar amp, or anything else. So there's no point in using this because it will not protect you, because you've got a complete circuit. Should you come in contact with the hot wire and the case of the isolation transformer or the chassis of the device under test, because that device is using a 3-prong wire and grounds the chassis, what essentially is a complete circuit back to the circuit panel. Therefore, you do not use this on a 3-prong device. Now, I made myself pretty clear, at least I thought I did, but there's always somebody in there that's got to question it. So now, you take your All-American 5, your radios that can give you a hot chassis depending on what direction you insert the plug into the outlet. You have a 50% chance of having a hot chassis, which could result in a dangerous situation. You're plugging your device, which has 2 prongs. It's a vintage radio. It has a hot chassis, but it does not use a 3rd prong. You don't put a 3rd prong cord and plug on a radio that's made in the 30s, because they didn't make them back then. All you need is a polarized plug, with the wide prong being the neutral and the narrow prong being the hot. But of course, these radios did not have those back then. There were no polarized plugs, so the plug could be inserted either way, even in a modern outlet. So, as long as you're using only a 2-prong plug here, whether it be a hairdryer and you drop it into a bathtub, you have an isolated neutral and of course a hot, of floating secondary on the isolation transformer secondary. So you're 100% safe. However, if you're a fool and you put your hand while you're working on an AA5 radio and you happen to rest your hand on the isolation transformer case, which is grounded, and happen to touch the chassis of the AA5, you're going to get a good shock, and maybe even fatal. So, the simple fact is, all I did was remove the bonded neutral from the case, which also was bonded to the green wire coming off the power line, and isolated it. It was a simple thing. It was a little eyelet. You take the nut off. It was bolted to the chassis. Lift it up. Put back the green wire and tape up the neutral, which was connected here and to the chassis. Remove it. Tape it up so it no longer becomes a hazard and cannot become grounded. You are 100% safe. I think I covered it thoroughly. So I posted some of these questions, and the last one was, the guy was understandable. And naturally, if you're using a two-prong device, you are 100% protected as far as touching one of these contacts and ground, because the current has no place to return. However, if you did not remove this bond, this neutral was grounded to the case, which is in turn grounded to the ground wire, which goes back to the power line, which also, the power panel, which is also shared and grounded at the bonding point at the electrical panel. So your ground and your neutral are grounded at the electrical panel at your house. I think I explained myself very thoroughly. I want to close this subject. I had to make this because I, every once in a while, been getting comments on it, and they're telling me it's incorrect. Please study what I'm trying to tell you. There is no way this is going to be harmful, and it is a 100% safe isolation transformer as long as you use it with a two-prong radio or whatever device only. If you want to plug in a three-prong, it is no longer an isolation transformer. It is simply a convenient place to plug in something. And I've done that myself. I have taken radios and devices that have a three-prong plug and plug it in here. They were transformer sets. So I just simply use this because these outlets are at a convenient location on the side of my bench where I can plug things in, which is easier than plugging it into an outlet strip that's in back of my test equipment, which is hard to get at. But just remember, you're 100% safe as long as you have a floating neutral, and these hot and cold wires are floating, and you're only using these two pins, the neutral and the hot, and you're not using the ground. Yes, I could remove the ground, but the ground is got a little solder tab that goes directly to the case. It's an inconvenient to remove those. I would butcher it up trying to. I know what this is and how it's hooked up and how it's working. So I removed the bonded neutral, and that's all you need to do. So if you get a transformer such as this, the neutral is bonded, you want to use it for an isolation transformer, just unbond the neutral from the ground and the green wire, and you'll have an isolation transformer. On the output of this, there happens to be a couple of caps across, there's a cap across each outlet. I guess that's noise suppression. I guess they use them for computer things or whatever. They're not going to hurt anything. They go across the neutral and the hot. They do not connect to ground. So they're perfectly safe. All right, folks. That's it. That's your electronic lesson for today. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody.